Hey FSM, I'm so glad you joined us for the Gathering Online and the last part of our Atypical series. The series has been all about family. It's been all about biblical families that are dysfunctional, that don't work, and even murdered people. So here's the thing, what we've learned is that God can still use our families even if we feel like they're a total loss. And what we want to talk about this week is one more thing that God could do in your family, and that's this. We want to talk about the idea that God can help you forgive so that the other things we've been talking about, the praying, the tough conversations, and the being used by God can happen. Okay, to get you in the mindset of this morning, which is all about forgiveness, I want to ask you some either or, would you rather forgiveness questions. So here's the first one. Would you rather forgive a sibling who took all of your Halloween candy, your favorite treats, or who finished the last bit of your favorite meal? How about this? Would you rather forgive a sibling who took cash out of your wallet or who wore one of your favorite pieces of clothing to school? Would you rather, how about this? Would you rather forgive a sibling who physically hurt you, maybe they pushed you or hit you or something like that, or who kind of more emotionally hurt you, maybe they're making fun of you? Lastly, and this one's tough, would you rather forgive a sibling who lied about you to somebody else or who is lying to you? Right? All of those things can be a little bit challenging, obviously, some more than others, but they get us in the mindset of what this morning is all about, and that is forgiveness. Now, here's what we know. No family is perfect because families are made of people and people are imperfect. But normal families, what they do is they harbor their anger, frustration, resentment, and let it blow up into huge fights or long distance and bunch of time between conversations. But atypical families know that family is too valuable to let it disappear. And so what they do is they lean in. They begin to work on what it looks like to forgive one another. And again, that's what today is all about. But before we get to the main story for the day, what I want to do is I want to show you a Bible Project video that gives you the larger scope behind the story today.
So Jacob goes on from there to have 12 sons, big family. But Jacob loves his 11th son, Joseph, way more than all the others. And so he gives him the special Technicolor dream coat. And his brothers, because of this, come to hate him.
So much so that they plan on killing him.
But they don't. They instead just sell him as a slave down in Egypt.
Now, while in Egypt, through this crazy series of events, Joseph goes from being in a prison cell to becoming the second in command there.
And so later on, the whole Middle East falls into this food shortage. And Joseph's brothers, they come down to Egypt looking for food. And then when they get there, who should they find as the ruler of the whole land?
It's Joseph, that guy they sold into slavery. But he actually saves them from starving to death.
And so here you have it. These are the great-grandchildren of Abraham who have done this heinous act to their brother. But God has transformed their evil into something good.
And that's exactly what Joseph says here in the last paragraph of the entire book. He says, you guys planned all of this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save people's lives.
Now, these words, they conclude the book because they actually summarize the message of the whole story so far. Humans keep choosing evil, and we are thinking they're screwing up God's plan, but he keeps turning their evil back into good. And somehow, he's going to use this family to restore humanity back to the garden.
So that Bible Project video just gave you that 30,000-foot view of the life of Joseph. See, here's the thing. His life goes from Genesis chapter 37 all the way to Genesis chapter 50. That's like a quarter of the book of Genesis is about the life of Joseph. Really longer than almost any other character in Genesis because Joseph's story is a big deal. But here's the thing. I can't cover all of it in the time we have together this morning, so I wanted to give you the big picture, and then I want to point out a few parts of his story today to talk about the conflict that his family had. And so Genesis chapter 37, verse 3 says this. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. Now, if you remember last week, we actually talked about Jacob and Esau and how Esau was his dad's favorite and Jacob was his mom's favorite. Well, that dysfunction of picking favorites continued into Jacob's family, and he actually picked a favorite as well. Like this passage says, his name is Joseph. And he wasn't very private about it. He gave him a special coat. He didn't hide anything. It was like, nope, all the kids knew Joseph was the favorite. And they knew it, and they did not like Joseph. Did you catch that? It said they couldn't even say a kind word to him. Now, here's the thing. I'm not trying to say Joseph was innocent in this, because I think he had a part to play too. Check this out. In verse number 7, it says this. This is Joseph talking to his brothers about a dream he had. He said, "We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way that he talked about them. Okay, so here's the deal. We got three parties at play here. We've got Jacob, dad, right? He has picked a favorite son. Very dysfunctional, okay? Number 2, we've got Joseph, who is the favorite son, not by any of his own fault, but he surely rubs it in his brothers' faces. And what we see here is he goes, "Well, I had a dream and you're going to bow down to me." And you know what? He actually tells his brothers that 2 times, not just this one time. So we can imagine, yeah, he probably throws this at his brothers pretty regularly. Number 3, we got the brothers who, because of dad's dysfunction, are mad at number 2, right? They're angry at their brother. It says they can't even speak a kind word to him. And then the dysfunction is going to elevate even to another level. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to try to get in the minds of the brothers. So let's picture this. You and I, we're brothers. Hey there. And our youngest brother is Joseph, okay? And so you and I, we're out in the field. We're working our tails off, okay? We're sweating. We're dirty. We're stinking because we're working with animals. And in the distance, we see Pretty Boy coming at us, okay? He's walking this way. He's in his fancy coat. And this is what we're picturing. He's coming from not manual labor, not sweaty, and he's coming to check in on us, not to come and help us. Okay. If that's me, I'm a little bit frustrated. I don't know about you, but here's what we read in verse number 18. They made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Okay, so here's then what happens is Reuben, the oldest brother, goes, "Time out. He is our brother. We shouldn't murder him." Okay, we learned that from Cain a while ago. We shouldn't murder him, okay? Let's just drop him in the cistern, and if he dies, it's his own fault for not making it out. And then Reuben must have known the person who wrote Genesis, because he's like, "Well, I was going to come back and get him out." The Bible actually says that. You can check it out for yourself in Genesis chapter 37. But here's how it plays out. This is what we see, verse 23. "So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into a cistern. Now the cistern was empty and there was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah," another one of the brothers, "said to his brothers, 'What will we gain by killing our brother, or in this case, letting him die? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.' And his brothers agreed." Okay, that got out of hand real quick. Dad picked a favorite. Favorite was kind of a punk, and we sold you into slavery. That's crazy. How did that happen? But that's what happened. And here's the deal. Reuben convinced his brothers to drop Joseph to the bottom of the cistern. And then I don't know where he went, but he came back after lunch and realized Joseph's gone. And he goes, "Fellas, what did you do?" Right? And they're like, "Well, we sold him into slavery. Do you want a cut of it?" And he goes, "What are we going to tell Dad? How do you explain his favorite son disappeared?" And they're like, "Well, we can cut up his robe and dip it in some blood, and we'll tell him he died." Okay, now we've taken it to even another level. We sold a dude to slavery. We're going to lie to Dad and let him mourn the death of his favorite child. This is crazy. Like I said, I've had some dysfunction in my family. I have fought with my brother, but nothing to this level. Anyway, here's what happens is Joseph makes it to Egypt, gets sold into slavery. Things actually go well for him and then get real bad, and he goes to prison because he got accused wrongfully for doing something he didn't do. And then he climbs his way up and becomes a servant of Pharaoh's and ultimately really the right-hand man of Pharaoh. Okay, so this big old family dysfunction pie that we've got going on here, everybody owns a slice. Some people, some smaller slices, some people, big old half a pie, I sold my brother into slavery kind of slices, right? Here's what happens is they show up to Egypt because the Middle East goes through that famine. Jacob's family shows up to Egypt and Jacob is actually still alive. Joseph takes care of his family and then they find out this guy that's been taking care of them is Joseph. But here's the deal. Joseph broke the dysfunction and he goes, I'm going to be the first one to go. Let me forgive you. Somebody has to go first, right? Now, the brothers didn't fully believe it because dad was still alive and they sold it off as, man, he at least wants a few good moments with his dad before dad passes away, which could totally be true. But here's what we discover all the way at the end of the story, all the way at the end of Genesis chapter 50, verse 15. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him, they said. Right? This big old family of dysfunction only knows dysfunction. Verse 16. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of God, of your father, beg you to forgive our sins. When Joseph received this message, he broke down and wept. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Look, we are your slaves, they said. Right, so what's going on there is they then lie again. They go, oh my gosh, how are we going to sell this? Well, maybe if we tell him dad said to forgive us, he'll do it. And I love Joseph's response here because he's done with the dysfunction. He's ready to be an atypical family that does things differently. And here's what happens in verse 19. Joseph reads right through the lie. But Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. How crazy is that? Generations of dysfunction ended because one guy chose to extend forgiveness. So there you have it. That's the big idea of the story. Forgiveness wins at the end of the day. Good things happen when we extend forgiveness to people. That's really actually what the Bible talks about a lot. And Jesus even taught about it. In Matthew chapter 18, when he taught about forgiveness, though, one of his disciples asked this question in verse 21. Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times. That's the question. Like 7 times? Is that enough? That's a lot, right? And Jesus replies with this. No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. 490 times. Not like that's an exaggeration, but he's actually serious. He goes, that's how God has forgiven you, and you too can forgive people in the same way. God wants us to forgive, even if the other person doesn't ask for it. And if you want to be an atypical family, a family that doesn't function like normal, but one that actually works, that might mean you have to extend forgiveness first. But here's what I want you to know this, okay? If you are being hurt physically, emotionally, sexually, if you're being abused, here's the thing. This does not apply to you. Don't hear me say, oh, I can just extend forgiveness and move on. That's not what we're saying in those cases. That's a much larger conversation. And what I want to encourage you to do is reach out to myself or any of our leaders. We've all been trained on this. And begin a conversation through text or some kind of messaging or even in person if you have the opportunity to do so. Because here's the thing, that needs to be dealt with entirely differently. For the rest of us, this forgiveness thing, I want to encourage you this way. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be big. It could actually be pretty simple. So think about these options. Number 1, admitting you've been hurt. Forgiveness could start as simple as that. Forgiveness could start telling God that you need help to forgive. Forgiveness could be asking God to heal the parts of your heart that have been hurt. Forgiveness could be choosing to focus on moving forward instead of looking at what has happened. Forgiveness could be forgiving yourself and asking for forgiveness, because we all need that from time to time. It doesn't have to look the same. Forgiveness can look different, but those are some great ways to do it. And here's what I want to do is I want to ask you 3 questions that we've been asking through this whole series. Number 1, how could forgiveness change your attitude or perspective? Number 2, how do you think forgiveness could change the person that you are at conflict with? Number 3, how do you think forgiveness could begin to change your family's patterns of long-term conflict? Okay, so to wrap up this whole series, we want to do something even more than those 3 questions. We want to ask a few things that take it really personal. So here's the first thing. Can you identify someone in your family that you are at conflict with or that you need to forgive? I'd encourage you to write their name down and begin praying for them today. What about this one? Let's think about last week and this week. Is it time to start processing even deeper? Maybe put it this way. Is there a time that you want to forgive them? Because you're tired of feeling angry, because you don't want to become bitter, because you miss having a close relationship. Think about what forgiving them would look like and what having a conversation might look like. Now I understand it's not going to be as easy as writing that stuff down and tomorrow things are going to be good. But if you begin to pray about it, you begin to pray about that conversation, things will be headed in the right direction. And here's what I want to do. I want to recap our series. We started all the way back with Adam and Eve, and we said even in the worst situation, God can use your family. Then we moved to Abraham and Lot, and we said one of the best things we can do for our family is pray for them. Last week we talked about Jacob and Esau, and we said no matter how bad things get, we've got to lean in, we've got to have conversation, because that's how we move forward. And this week what we're saying is, even though it's probably the toughest thing on the list, forgiveness is essential for the rest of those things to even happen. So there you go. There you have it. My hope, my prayer is that your family can get healthier. But here's what I know is it's not your job to fix your family, but man, you sure could go first into taking steps towards the future. I'd encourage you to be the first one in your family, to be praying, to be leaning into tough conversation, and to be extending forgiveness. With that, let me pray for you, and I'd encourage you to stick around for some worship. God, thank you so much that you have given us family, even when they feel dysfunctional. God, can you give us the courage this week to be thinking about who we're in conflict with? Be ready for a conversation, and most importantly, begin to extend forgiveness. We love you, Lord. It's your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, with that, we'll see you next week for some brand new stuff.